Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessica Rockwood. I'm the Vice President for Client Engineering and Account Technical Leaders at IBM. And I am thrilled to have the opportunity to kick off our track around trusted AI applications. My goal this afternoon, at least it's afternoon where I am, is to really give each and every one of you some food for thought around why trust is at the heart of anything we do when building AI applications. There's incredible technology that we are able to leverage, but we need to do so in a responsible fashion in order to create the best experience for the consumers of those applications. Why does it matter? As we take a look at this chart, it outlines for you many of the reasons that trust is at the core of these applications. If you think about outbound AI applications, consumers, you see a few percentages there. Everyone wants to know that their data is being used in a responsible fashion. When they start to distrust, get that sense of big brother or misuse of their application, that can result in them leaving that organization. And similarly, as you think about making these applications internally in your organizations, you want to look at ways that you're doing this in a supportive, socially responsible, and trusted way for employees to buy in and start to change the culture to really adopt this. And as you can see on the right-hand side, 8 out of 10 socially responsible companies say that their organizations outperform in ethics, transparency, accountability, cybersecurity. These are all the ways that they build trust and get that cultural adoption of AI being in use. Let's look, though, at what are the scales, what are the challenges in scaling AI across the enterprise? And we did a survey of business leaders, and you can see that 80% of business leaders saw at least one of these areas of ethical concern coming up. But I would argue each of us at various points in different application of AI have seen this become an issue, whether it's explainability. This one, to me, honestly, is core to trust. If you can't see and understand why decisions are being made by an application, it's really difficult to gain trust in them. And then similarly, as we think about the top right and ethics, so much of that ethical and safe use of generative AI is fed by whether are there biases ingrained in what this application is doing? Is it fair? Is it built on a high quality of data? Trained to look holistically at the whole set of information. So hopefully I'm kind of bringing to life why there's challenges, but let's talk about then how do we approach this problem? And there really are some great sets of guidance. And I wanted to start by taking you through some of the principles we put in place at IBM. Because not only are we building AI technology, but we are also adopting that same AI technology, both for our clients as well as our employees. And so we started first on the left-hand side with 3 core principles for trust and transparency. And I believe if you start at the beginning of any project that's going to implement AI with these 3 core principles, you really are going to steer yourself right. So the first is that the purpose of AI is to augment human intelligence. And this is really at the core of everything we build, that the intention is to make each human and individual more productive, more efficient, able to do more with less. The second principle is that data and insights belong to the creator. And this is really at the heart of your data is your data, your insight is your insight, and we shouldn't be trading, making that available, ending up in issues with copyright infraction, etc. And then third, new technology must be transparent and explainable. And as we think about double clicking into those principles, we then defined 5 pillars that would really ensure that at any given point in time in any project that we build, that we're meeting the core elements of trust. So it starts again with that explainability portion. Can we provide human interpretable information about why the predictions and insights are made the way they were? The second is fairness. Can we be sure, ensure, monitor that we have been equitable in the treatment of humans, of groups? I'll even show you some examples later on. It's like wherever the data comes from, can we ensure that there is no bias in how that is evaluated? The third is robustness. We have to be able to deal with both the happy path, but also exceptional conditions. Anytime there are abnormalities or changes, it needs to address that in the system we build. Fourth, transparency. Where did the data come from? How was it designed? How was it developed? And fifth, certainly not least, privacy. Can we protect and safeguard privacy, data rights? How do we ensure that people only get access to the information that they should have access to? So, whole bunch of pillars, whole bunch of principles that can steer you right. How do you think about this space of generative AI, and what are really some of the elements to be alert to? So we know that generative AI has an incredible number of benefits. We've seen the impact, the increase in productivity, the shorter time to value, really incredible change that's happening. What I think is fascinating, though, is the different risks that are now emerging. And as you look at the right-hand side, starting at the bottom in those traditional risks, these have basically been omnipresent from the time even traditional AI was in use. We were looking at how do you leverage, how do you make sure you're building on the right data? How do you stay alert to personal information, identification, informed consent, etc. But as we move into the generative AI space, there is a wealth of other risks that start to come into play. You can see a set of risks that have been very much intensified by generative AI, but maybe even more importantly, emerging risk areas. Each and every one of these have been documented as part of the IBM Risk Atlas. And so for every one of these bullet points, there are examples, there are things shown about how you might move to counteract, and be sure that as you apply these principles of trust and ethics, you can avoid having any of these risks impact your application. So how do we do that? And this comes down to the principles of governance. So I wanted to start first with data governance. And this is really going to factor in later on in our track with one of our presenters, because at the start of any AI project, the first thing you have to evaluate is your data. So at IBM, we take this idea of looking sort of at three different dimensions of that. The first is the provenance of the data. How is the data being used? Where did it come from? Are we ensuring that we stay consistent with any compliance and regulations associated with it? The second is it trusted data? So we've done a very intensive process internally where we ensure that with any of the models that we are using, that they have removed copyrighted material, hate, profanity, sensitive private information, so that we can ensure that it's a strong set of data at the core. And as you work with any other model out there, you're going to want to answer these same questions to be confident that not only is the data you bring to the model trusted, but that the data the model was built on is also trusted. And then third, how do you continue to review and evaluate the quality of this data? And we've taken an approach of building out a centralized content and AI model review flow. We're leveraging parts of the IBM portfolio that we'll talk a little bit about later. And it's really to ensure that not only do we have a process around reviewing it, but also that we have it documented. And that then enables you to meet any of the reporting and transparency needs in your organization to, again, build trust in those consumers of the application. So the data governance is where you start, but then you move to AI governance. And it's complex. This is a complicated task that is at hand. I wanted to capture for you where some of the common challenges sit. And as we work with different organizations, as we look at trying to get applications off the ground that leverage AI, one or more of these categories may come to bear. The first being that if things are being done more manually or with disjointed processes, that it can be incredibly time consuming and error prone. And certainly looking at opportunities to automate in that flow, make sure you have the right checks and balances can make a really big difference. The second is that the process you have in place today to review this may not have been modernized to think about the aspects of AI and generative AI specifically. And so, again, how do you think about a single, simplified, straightforward process to ensure full coverage? You're also going to need to think about flexibility in that platform and in that approach. Because as you look at the application of generative AI, it's going to differ. There may be some cases that are incredibly straightforward, some forms of document retrieval augmented generation that are built based on a set of published content, help content. Or it might be something related to an HR workflow that has very different requirements and sensitivities around personal data. So you want flexibility about how you do this. And last but not least, to democratize access to this, making sure that it is very visible and very clear the bar that you must reach for every AI application to be considered trusted, how you launch that, how you then monitor to ensure adherence over time, and can take action should there be any changes to that status. So how do we approach that AI governance? So it really comes into two sections. I'm going to talk briefly about the top part here that talks about this organizational AI governance. And then we're going to spend a lot more time talking about how do you automate that workflow and what tools might be available to help you with it. So as we think about the organizational governance, you'll see listed here under the who, there's all sorts of different roles and different potential governing bodies. This could be as simple as a single person in each one of those buckets, or as complex as the number of groups you see listed, to ensure that as you kick off a project, as you think about the application of AI, that you have thought about where you want to apply it, what types of workflows and operations are most applicable to this, and that you're really ensuring you put in place an overall governance structure and risk assessment process. Then where you're going to spend most of your time, and this is where I imagine many of you are living today, is in the actual governance of the life cycle. And you're going to have three different phases of it. First off is around that development and deployment. As you start the process, how do you ensure that you build with ethics and trust at the core of what you're building? As you go to deploy that, what are the steps and workflows that ensure that you have the proper checkpoints and sign off to be able to release? And last, but certainly not least, how do you continue to monitor and manage that once in production? These applications have a life cycle. The data is constantly changing. The needs of the business are constantly changing. So you want to ensure that you've got that visibility, the opportunity to monitor and navigate. So fear not, there is a set of tooling available. I'm going to take you through IBM's example of it because, again, you're going to get a little bit more visibility to this in sessions later on today in our track that really do provide a comprehensive, integrated platform to enable you to meet all of those needs. And that's watsonx.governance. It does support both generative AI and predictive machine learning. So as we started at the beginning, right, there was always a set of risks associated with traditional AI. And now as we advance into generative AI, it's just opening up the aperture to cover all of those aspects as well. And there's really three core components to the platform. The first is looking at compliance. So when you think about that first development of applications and of models, how do we ensure that what we are building will meet the safety and transparency regulations that are required within your business or within this use case? And I love to think of these as that nutrition label, right? When you take a look at a purchased item at the grocery store and it tells you what ingredients went in, maybe it even gives you warnings for allergies. Think of it as the same idea here, but with your AI application. The second group of capability is around risk. How do we detect, mitigate risk, monitor for a lot of these metrics that will tell you how well is the AI behaving for the business use case? And then third, this life cycle governance. How do we manage, monitor, govern the AI models themselves, whether those be IBM provided models from the Granite Foundation series, open source communities, or any other model provider. So let's double click just to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what this looks like in the tool set. So around that compliance portion, you're really looking at an interface similar to what you see on the right-hand side here that showcases and gives you essentially a dashboard. There's an ability to then take action where required, green, typically good, yellow, areas of concern, red, where you want to take action. Thinking about the application of AI from the concept of a use case. So it may be a set of different AI technologies being pulled together to answer the use case, but I'm able to evaluate that holistically and think about how this impacts the business. The second thing integrated into this are fact sheets. Fact sheets are those nutrition labels for the models, and it captures information not only about the data that was used to feed the model, but also what sort of validation was done, what data was used in order to do that validation, what updates have been made to the model, what are some of the changes in the life cycle, and who was responsible for each one of those steps. And you'll see many of these aspects highlighted later on today in our track around AWS and SageMaker. The second, as we look at, is around managing risk. And so here you can see an example on the right-hand side, looking at the drift of a particular model that is in use at an organization. And again, this is about being able to look over time, to be able to be proactive in identifying where there might be increasing risk about the usage of AI, whether that be in an application, in a particular use case. And being able to do this at scale across the entire organization allows you to start to act in a little bit more of a targeted fashion, rather than having to look at everything across the board. This automated monitoring is in place and can flag you, giving you that historical context to be able to evaluate what are the right next steps or actions to take. And then the third component, as we think about operationalizing this AI, really gets into capturing the model metadata, looking at the application, the life cycle, dimensional reporting across that. And so you can see an example here on the right-hand side, really trying to highlight for a particular use case, what model is being used, the versioning associated with it. Again, giving you as the operator of these AI applications full transparency and the ability then to share that with anyone that is consuming this. You'll be able to incorporate as well aspects that show you things like bias. We've seen examples in terms of some of the metrics we look at. We've had cases with, let's take an example of a credit card application and individuals that are declined due to bias embedded in the AI. So for example, something that was done by race, or something that was done by socioeconomic profile. And when we run into those situations, it can often lead to fines and or litigation due to the bias embedded in the system. And so again, these are the sorts of considerations that you want to have where your organization will be exposed. And the risk atlas that I mentioned, and I'll make sure there's a link to it at the end of the presentation, highlights amongst each one of these areas of bias where there may be associated regulations that will certainly lead to different fines associated. So now let's just take a step back. We've talked through all of the different piece parts. How do we then think about that whole process of governance end to end? And one of the things I love about this representation is it captures that there are many different dimensions and facets that all have to come together to provide that trusted implementation. You can see in the inner part of this circle that there are aspects of trust in the people and in the culture. So this is about making sure at the very start you engage a diverse set of stakeholders that really bring multidimensional thinking about what you are building, how to meet the user groups that you are supporting, and how to try and avoid any inherent bias that might come into play. There is also going to need to be focus on educating the teams and the people you're working with, encouraging them to be open to adopting this. And then ensuring, as you think about those kind of policies and processes that are implemented, that they are completely in line with the strategic direction you've got with your organization, that you implement and leverage the organizational structure from a governance and oversight perspective. When you are building out an application to benefit your customer service organization, you want to make sure that at the beginning, you're talking to that organization because they are your key stakeholders and users. And then once you've launched this, you want that organizational structure in place, that there is some degree of governance and evaluation, that you're getting a feedback loop on whether this is truly impacting and benefiting the team you're getting, and really validating the business metrics on top of the metrics you have from the AI itself. And then last but not least, as you think about the data and the technology, it's ensuring that you build in at the core, right from the beginning, this knowledge and awareness of how to support the transparency, how to support the risk, the reporting, any of those compliance needs. And this last bullet point down on the bottom left, you want to reduce the manual efforts to do so. Leveraging platforms and tool sets that automate the capture of this data, that create a very straightforward question and answer process to provide all of the necessary data to document the usage of AI is not only going to increase the team efficiency, but it's also going to improve the morale of your team because they are going to feel like superheroes. They're able to innovate with the lowest possible overhead to still meet all of those trust and compliance needs. So let's take a look at something in practice if we were to employ this overall AI governance proposal. And I share this example because I think it's an interesting one as you think about how ideas come about. So you can see on the left-hand side the idea of a team coming up saying, listen, we want to use AI to aggregate data about products and automate safety maintenance reviews. And as this comes into your organization, you assess the need. You want to be able to look for where are there possible risks? Where can we leverage AI effectively? And where do we want to maybe make sure, at least to start, until we've built trust, until we've got full adoption, that we've got proper guardrails in place? And so in this particular case, there was a bit of a concern that no human review, no human in the loop on this decision making could be a risk up front, that the team required to use this may not trust what's happening unless they're given that opportunity to weigh in on the insights. And similarly, we don't necessarily have confidence right at the beginning that there has been sufficient training data. You remember we talked about the need to be able to handle the exceptions, to handle things that come outside of that without hallucination and without inaccurate guidance. And so in this case, you might have your review process come and state, listen, we believe there's strong value for AI. To start, potentially it does the aggregation, it puts together a recommendation, but all of those must be reviewed and approved by a human. In essence, there's a button click to say yes, and that there should also be very strict monitoring around what is happening with those insights. Were they valuable? And did we end up with any limitations on the training data? You can imagine in subsequent iterations, as we build more trust, we're going to be able to move forward with absolute confidence on every AI application. A few more examples in play here of clients that have integrated governance into their process. I wanted to just share, if you look at this example from the US Open on the right-hand side, you'll remember I mentioned at the beginning this idea that bias can come in many, many forms. And I thought it was fascinating as this implementation of an AI assistant was put into place. The AI assistant was looking at match highlights and creating an excitement score. And I have loved watching all of these different AI analyses that happen of live events. What was fascinating as they analyzed the data is they determined that there were two factors that led to bias in the assessment. One was player rank, and I think many of us could imagine how that might happen. But the other was where the match was played. So often I think when we think about bias, we think about race, socioeconomic, name, detail, elements like that. But it can be as simple as these kind of contextual pieces of information that, for whatever reason, end up being more dominant to the decision than expected. So I hope that all of this has given you some excitement, some food for thought. We will be sharing these charts. We'll have additional links as you see to help you learn more. We've got a lot published to help you consider. I did see an additional question come in asking about the role diverse data sets play in minimizing bias to the large language model. And I love the question, and it's actually one of the best intros I can make to the next 3 sessions that we have coming up, because this question around data sets and how do you prepare your data and really assess, is there sufficient quality and certification, will be an element that comes up in the second session after this in our track. We're going to start with a glimpse and a deep dive into leveraging watsonx governance with AWS SageMaker. The IBM team that works directly with Amazon has some incredible experience to share with you all there. We will then have an AI engineer describing this idea of preparing data for large language model applications. And as you say, you want to have the opportunity to go through and really in your data curation, end up with your own AI governance board signing off, certifying those data sets. And if you are looking for any help in that application or process, we are certainly open to collaborating with you here at IBM. And then the last session in our track is really about unlocking the power of community. This will be led by Rob Wenger of Higher Logic. He is an incredible speaker. I had the opportunity to collaborate with him at the TechXchange conference last fall, and he will give you an incredible glimpse into the application of building a trusted application. And I can think of no other application better than our IBM community. So with that, I will wrap us up on the kickoff for our trusted AI application track. I hope it has given you great food for thought about how to integrate trust and ethics at the core of anything you do with AI. The sky is the limit for innovation and bringing value to our employees and to our clients, but let's make sure we do so in a trusted fashion. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the sessions.